If you crochet blankets and clothes and you think you can use exactly the same tips you know to crochet a perfect amigurumi in a heartbeat, you are wrong. It has been almost 9 years since I started crocheting amigurumis, and there are some tips from the traditional crochet like blankets and scarves, for example, that can be easily transferred to amigurumis. But some other tips do not work that easily. If you're new here in the channel, I am Bianca from Crochetniks, and if you learned how to crochet blankets and clothes first from your grandmother, well, they probably taught you to read the yarn label to decide on the size of the crochet hook that you're going to choose for your project. But it does not work like that for amigurumis. And this tip is very useful for when we crochet other projects or when we knit, for example. I do know how to knit, although there's been a while that I don't knit anything because I'm constantly crocheting amigurumis. Every time I pick up a new skein of yarn and I want to knit a scarf for me or for my husband, for example, I always check the yarn label to check the size of the needle that I'm going to choose. But when we are talking about amigurumis, and this is something that I'm constantly talking about here in the channel, I would not go with the one that the yarn label recommends. Because when talking about amigurumis, we want our stitches as closed as possible. First, we don't want stuffing to come out of it, and secondly, because when we see gaps between the stitches in amigurumis, it does not have like a very professional look. They are more beautiful when they are very, very tight, like very, very close to each other. So that's why we usually use a smaller crochet hook size. I have a playlist here in the channel where I talk about like the best yarn. I think the name of the playlist is like best yarn for amigurumis, and there are lots of videos about different types of yarns and things like that. But you'll see that for all the yarns that I mentioned in the videos, I always use a smaller crochet hook size than the one that the yarn label recommends. Tip number 2, not all yarns work for beginners. I know some people started their amigurumi journey crocheting with blushy yarn, but I'm in this field for a long time. And honestly, if you're one of these people who started in the amigurumi journey with blushy yarn, let me tell you, you're a genius. Because it's so hard in the beginning. We face so many challenges, like holding a crochet hook is a challenge. Knowing how to, I don't know, wrap the yarn in your hands to create a crochet tension. This is so hard. Everything is difficult in the beginning. Differentiate the stitches is difficult. So learning with plushy, chenille, fluffy yarns is something super hard. But this is something, and I'm mentioning it here, because this is something that I never worried when I started to knit, for example. I consider myself a beginner level for knitting because I don't know how to knit complex stuff. I only knit like some basic and simple stitches. But when it comes to knitting, for example, I don't even consider the type of yarn. Although I'm kind of a beginner, it looks like it doesn't matter that much. I just look at the yarn and it's like, okay, this is beautiful. I will buy this one and knit a scarf for me. And that's totally fine. But for amigurumis, I always had this concern because it looks like we have to be so attentive to the amount of stitches to keep the proportion of the amigurumi and not to skip a stitch or things like that, that we need to choose the correct yarn so we can keep track of those stuff. Am I seeing the stitches correctly? Did I skip any stitch in this round? So these things are so hard in the beginning that choosing the correct yarn, I would say, is like essential to start. And just so you know, I have an example here. I bought this yarn because I wanted to create a scarf for me, and I still haven't got the time to do it. I'm being really honest, but I look at it and it's a difficult yarn to work because of all the fluffiness. It's difficult to see the stitch properly, but I'm not afraid of using this yarn to knit a scarf, for example. But keep in mind that I'm a beginner when it comes to knitting, so I'm not afraid of trying. But if I have to crochet like an outfit for an amigurumi with this type of yarn here, oh my goodness, I would be a bit scared. Although I'm an advanced crocheter, because of all the fluffiness, it's beautiful, it's soft, but it's also hard to see the stitches, especially if you crochet with a smaller crochet hook size and keep the stitches like really tight. I know this is a very extreme example, but it's just to illustrate what I'm talking about. Tip number 3, you need to learn how to read a crochet pattern. Well, some of you might say, Bianca, I don't need to read a crochet pattern. I can simply follow a YouTube tutorial. And you're right. If you want to just follow a YouTube tutorial, it's totally fine. Go with it. But when it comes to amigurumis, reading a crochet pattern is super important. It's difficult to crochet an amigurumi like 100% by heart, you know. And when we crochet a blanket, and I'm talking about simple projects. So for example, I have this project here, which is an octopus, and I have the tutorial here in the channel in case you want to watch. This is a simple project. It is considered a beginner level pattern, and I'm only comparing simple projects here. So if I was supposed to crochet a blanket or a simple pillow with no details or anything like that, because there are some beautiful patterns for pillows being sold on Etsy and they are a bit complex, but I'm talking like, I don't know, with a skein of yarn like that, I want to crochet a simple pillow to put in my couch, and I decide that I wanted to have, I don't know, 30 centimeters, because if I wanted to crochet a pillow with a skein of yarn like that, or if you want to crochet a simple blanket with no extra details, a scarf for example, I don't usually follow a pattern. I just crochet by heart. I start crocheting and okay, I have 30 centimeters. This is the size of the pillow that I want, and I keep crocheting without checking any kind of pattern. Totally fine. But it's not the same when it comes to amigurumis. And I know sometimes we can simply start crocheting an amigurumi by heart and you create something that you're proud of. But usually we have to test it a bit more to make it work. And again, I will use my octopus as an example here because this is an easy pattern, a beginner-friendly one. But I had to like really stop, concentrate to create this pattern. Like I wanted it to be flat at the bottom. So I had to test a couple of techniques to get to this result. And okay, this part here, it's like half of a bow. It's kind of easy, it's the foundation of the amigurumis. But in order to create the tentacles, I tested a couple of different techniques, easy techniques to reach this result. So it's kind of different with the amigurumi. At least that's how I feel when it comes to amigurumis. And you know that my husband also crochets and knits, and it's funny because I think he knits better than me, but I'm a beginner, I told you that before, and I never got the time to explore my abilities with knitting that much. But when I shared these tips with him, because I wanted him to check the script for this video before I recorded, he agreed with me because he said, yeah, I never check patterns, it's so rare to check patterns. He already knitted socks and other type of clothing and things like that, and he was like, yeah, usually it feels like some things that I knit and not everything. There are lots of complex patterns out there. I'm not talking about this complex stuff, but he had the same impression, like to knit a scarf and like crochet simple things, we usually don't need patterns, but for amigurumis we feel that we always need a pattern. So that's why I believe it's so important to learn how to read an amigurumi, a written amigurumi pattern. And also because in the beginning I said, okay, you can check a YouTube tutorial and you can follow along, it's go with the flow, it's easy that way. But if you do that, you also limit yourself because there are so many different and beautiful patterns with different techniques available out there that you can learn and explore your creativity a bit more. So I encourage you 100% to try to learn how to read a crochet pattern. If you're still here with me in the video, remember to give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel so you won't miss any new tips, tricks, tutorials that I bring here every week. You can also subscribe to my newsletter so you keep updated on the behind the scenes, all the projects that I'm working, and maybe help me decide the topics for the next videos here in the channel. But hold on, because the other tips that I have are great and I'm sure that you love them. Tip number 4, crochet tension. And guys, this is something that changes so much from when we crochet clothes to when we crochet amigurumis. And even when we crochet clothes for amigurumis, this is something that we have to pay attention like very carefully because it changes. I said it in the beginning and I'll tell you again. When we are crocheting amigurumis, we want our stitches as tight as possible to have the professional look, to avoid stuffing to come out of the toy. But working with a bigger crochet hook size and having like loose stitches and gaps between the stitches is totally fine when we are crocheting clothes, for example. And I have a beautiful example here to share with you. This is my chicken called Yoga, and I told you the story behind this chicken in another video that I will leave here. It's here, I guess. But this chicken is from the Pica-Pau 3 book. It's called Greta in the book, but I call her Yoga. And you see that my chicken has like very, very tight stitches in the wings, the beak, the cheeks, the body. You can see how tight the stitches are. You cannot see gaps between the stitches. This is something like super important when it comes to creating the amigurumi. But this is the perfect example because, and let me remove this part of the chicken. But when you see this part, it's like, I forgot how to say it in English, I'm sorry, but this part of her outfit. I cannot keep my stitches that tight in this part. It would not be that beautiful. And when we crochet clothes, and let me put my chicken aside, but when we crochet clothes, we want it to have movement. And this is why it has to be like this. You cannot keep your stitches too tight when you're crocheting clothes for amigurumis or clothes in general. You need to have the movement like this. If you crochet, I don't know, a dress or a skirt, you want it to have movement. So usually, and I'm not saying that this is a rule because sometimes you want it to be like super, super tight, but most of the times when we are crocheting clothes, we want this movement. And that's why the stitches are not that tight. While here in the chicken, you see like the wings, it has like a more robust aspect. And this is something hard to explain because you can only feel. This yarn here is very similar to the one that I used in the tail part of the chicken. But here it's like, it's very hard and very robust because I need it to be like this. If it was soft with gaps between stitches and the stitches were not that tight, probably the tail would be like this, down, and would not be up that way. Because this is how I want it to be. So that's why here in the tail, the stitches were super tight. While here for the clothes, I wanted to have movement. And that's why here my stitches are not that tight. And this is something I heard a couple of times from people who are transitioning from the traditional crochet, who crocheted clothes the entire lives, to crochet amigurumis. A couple of people shared with me that this was a struggle for them because they were not used to creating such tight stitches. So this is interesting. They are super advanced crocheters. They know how to do it really well, but the crochet tension that they kept in their entire lives to crochet clothes is completely different to the crochet tension that they have to apply when crocheting amigurumis. There is something that I have to admit. Crocheting an outfit like this can be way more relaxing sometimes than crocheting an entire amigurumi, because here we have to be so attentive to our stitches all the time, because at least for me, I'm a perfectionist, and if I see a gap, I get frustrated and I go back. So yeah, I won't say that it's stressful, but it's something that I pay attention like all the time. And when I'm crocheting something like this, it's like, oh, this is a bit looser than the previous one. That's totally fine. No one realizes that kind of thing when we are crocheting those sort of pieces like that. Well, and since I'm talking about these differences regarding the stitches, that here, for example, when I look at it very, very closely, I see some bigger stitches and some smaller ones, but in the end, it doesn't matter that much. So since I'm talking about it, I have to jump into our last tip, tip number 5, which is totally related to it. And during your first projects, if you're a beginner, and you are in your first projects, don't keep frogging it until you reach perfection. And I know you want to reach it. I know you want to look at your amigurumis and be proud of the work that you did. I know, and I totally encourage people to try again until they are satisfied with the project. But the main issue here for me is when a person keeps frogging the amigurumi like hundreds of times until they get to this perfect amigurumi, and it's only their, I don't know, second, third amigurumi. So don't do it. And I know, guys, because I faced myself and I see other people struggling with it, because it's easier to see the flaws that we commit when we crochet an amigurumi like that than when we crochet an outfit. But don't keep frogging your amigurumi until you get to this point that you're dreaming of. So my advice for you is try the amigurumi, finish this project, and if you're not 100% satisfied with it, observe the things that you should improve and go to the next one. You learn when you try, when you expose yourself to different techniques and different projects. So just keep trying. So I really want to encourage you not to keep this perfectionist mindset when you're starting, especially if you're transitioning from the traditional crochet to amigurumis, for example. Some people don't even face any difficulties. Totally fine, but my advice here is for the ones that feel this struggle, because I know that this struggle is real and there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, I told you that before, but in case this is your first video, I'll tell you again. I know how to play the drums, and this is the only musical instrument that I know how to play. So I have this knowledge of this instrument, but if I start to learn, I don't know, piano, I will struggle with lots of challenges as well. So it's music. I'm in the same field, but it's a different instrument. It's a new art. So keep in mind that although you have the skills, you have the knowledge, it's totally fine to face difficulties and overcome these difficulties with practice, okay? Don't push yourself too hard. And I have seen people in this loop like forever. They start an amigurumi, they don't like it, and they frog it. And they start it again, and they say, okay, I already know what to do in this round because I've done it like once or twice. So they do it, and it's still not perfect. So they decide to go back again, and they never finish the project. They get frustrated, and they simply leave the project aside and never go back to it. It's sad. Don't do that to yourself, because I promise you, if you finish the project, go to the next one, and you compare the second, the third, the fourth amigurumi with the first one that you did, you see that there is some improvement in all the work that you have done. And that's it for today. Remember to subscribe to my channel in case you haven't done that so far. And activate the notification bell so you won't miss any new content that I bring here every week. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll leave you with this video here because I am sure it will be very helpful to you.